Starting in three, two, one. Howdy, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Bremer Research Moment. So, those of you who follow me on LinkedIn know that I'm going to be teaching at the University of Chicago. I'll be at the Harris School of Public Policy. I'm grateful to a good friend for suggesting they hire me. This has been in the works for a while. I've been preparing. And so, of course, a week and a half ago, they came to me and said, hey, you know, all the stuff you put together for what I'll call a traditional survey research course, would you mind teaching a course on online research? We know that's your specialty. We don't really do that from an academic standpoint. Think the students could really benefit from it. And, you know, of course, I was excited. This is my area of expertise, although I have a background in traditional survey research as well. And I think it's important that as these students go out into the real world, they understand how a lot of research is being done these days. But I actually went back to them with a counterproposal. And the counterproposal was, can I teach a course that I'm going to call Modern Survey Research Techniques and Methodologies? And the reason that I didn't want to teach a course purely in online survey research is that I think that my background in traditional survey research really helped me as we move forward in the industry. Plus, I think folks who know, who have a baseline in sort of the theories, really benefit from that. There are less and less people who have the background in more traditional research. As I started in this industry, there really wasn't such a thing called online survey research. I grew up with it. So the way that I'm going to teach the course, it's going to be what I call a blend of theory and reality. The first half of each section, will be on a specific topic, and we're going to talk about the theory. What sort of the books say survey research looks like in that space. And then we're going to talk about reality, and we're going to juxtapose the two of them. I'm going to give them what's good, what's bad, things of that nature. It's really important to know where you're coming from in order to know where you're going. And so that's sort of the theme of today's talk. Having been going through my preparation for the course and having a lot of great conversations. One of the great things about the podcast is that I'm talking to more and more people. One of the things that I've really realized is that not everyone knows the history of online survey research. And it's strange to say, I don't feel any older than I was over 25 years ago when I started in this industry. But there are a lot of folks that didn't join the industry who are veterans now until 2010, 2015, that don't know what went on in those first few days, particularly when we weren't thought of as good survey research. So let's take a moment to talk about the history of online survey research. So, as I said, my initial background was in traditional survey methodology. I was really in political science, but the first survey courses I took were either in the statistics department or there. There really wasn't such a thing as online survey research. Fun fact, I have worked for 3 separate companies who have claimed that they invented, in some form or fashion, online survey research. And there's always a little twist, the first survey, the first panel, the first representative research. And if you go beyond the 3 that I've worked for, there are a lot more out there that claim that they're the ones who invented survey research. Well, all I'll say is it takes a village. We came from a time when the internet was basically being used by college students to play video games or do other nefarious things. And it wasn't all that utilized by others. That started to change in the mid to late 90s. The internet penetration, those who were online, grew and grew and grew. For those of you who didn't realize, we used to have to get online via our phone, and it was slower than you can ever imagine. So the idea that someone would use their precious time to take a survey was definitely a risk in all of this. So, we started off, we had an internet penetration rate that was lower than 40%. So, of course, you had selection bias. Those who were online did not look like those who were not online. And we were trying to do representative research. We were trying to actually make claims about those who were online and not online. So it looked a lot different than it does today, where particularly if you include mobile phones, everyone's online in effect. You're very out of the norm if you don't have access to what we would call the internet in some form or fashion. People are shopping online, people are doing quite a few things. So we set up panels, and by the way, these panels were big. I think there's a little bit of thought that the first panels weren't big. We had when I was at Harris, which is the first place I really worked. And by the way, one of the 3 places that claimed they invented online survey research, we had panels that were in the millions. It was a strange world. The way that we were trying to do representative research is we used some statistical models to connect to more traditional forms of research. So borrowing characteristics from phone surveys, from face-to-face surveys, things of that nature. But we had these huge panels. We did a lot of experimentation. That's one of the reasons I moved from academia over to Harris. The gentleman who's the CEO, Gordon Black, used to be a professor in my department, and he really took an academic approach, which people borrowed and said, well, if they can do it, obviously you should believe that our stuff is good. But the experimentation taught us a lot of things. And in a strange way, they taught us things that we've forgotten. Those that don't remember history are doomed to repeat it. I think I got that a bit off, but that's the way that I feel. I think those who are new to the industry are experiencing what we're going through, particularly in the quality space, as something new and something different, whereas those of us who have been around forever are experiencing it as more of the same, or everything is old is new again. So effectively, we looked at incentives, we looked at question wording, we looked at order bias, we looked at how did you sample most appropriately. And I have to laugh, I use this example a lot. We were trying to figure out how often do you sample folks. Well, we had these big panels and not a crazy amount of throughput in the panels. We were still growing, and people had to believe they could do reliable research, answer business questions through survey research. So we had a discussion at one point which was basically, do we actually survey people more than once a month? What's the best practice? We set best practices, and the very first one was we'll go back to them once a month. Now, in today's day and age, you might go back to them 2 or 3 times in 30 minutes. So things have definitely changed. And I think the research that we've done needs to be redone. We've been a victim of our success, and we just pretend because we need to get the job done that what we're doing is fine. It's not going to create quality issues. Whereas, given the research we had done, we know that it will create quality issues. But how do we mitigate those things? I think we need to go back to some of those things we were doing in the early days, where we were being pressured and being told that we weren't legitimate in that sense. So, so 40% penetration. One of the first things that we did was we said we want to prove that we can do this. And we did that. There are very few things, and this is shocking to those who don't remember it. There are very few things where you actually know the right answer. If you're doing a survey, you can do some baseline things, but typically you'll get around that. If you ask something that's an opinion or belief about something, you don't know the right answer. One area that surveys do in fact play in, where we know the right answer quickly, is in elections. So we set our sights on the 2000 elections. We went through our methodologies. We built up our panels so that we could actually do state-by-state forecasts in most places. And we were highly successful. This was, I'm famous at Harris for creating something that was on the timesheet for the longest time, which was you may not charge more than 24 hours in a single day. And they agreed that I legitimately was charging because I was multitasking on things, but we were up for nights and nights in a row. And we just killed it. We did amazing at this. And this was the 2000 election. Again, if you don't remember, this was the contested election between George W. Bush and Al Gore. And we actually we reported to the 10th of a percentage point from our online. By the way, I was also doing a telephone, and I was working with just amazing folks. Humphrey Taylor, David Crane, John Siegel, and both of our surveys, which we did not connect, both of our surveys, our polls did extraordinarily well. But the online poll nationally got to within a 10th of a percentage point. And state by state, we called every state but one correct. And we were harsh on our judgment. Not only did we have to be close, but we had to name the right winner. And I also learned quite a few things, including, you check what you have and you check to make sure you've done correctly. But if you're not where everybody else is in polling, but you believe your methodologies are correct, you go with it. I've made a history of correct calls that everyone else got wrong. So in 2000, it was the Hillary Clinton Senate race that we called being a blowout, where everybody else said it was dead even. In fact, the last election I did was the Scottish referendum. And we went out with it because everybody had called that the Scottish referendum was going to be adopted, or it was a toss-up. We actually had it as a 10-point lead, and we nailed the thing. And we did that through a quick survey methodology. It worked out extraordinarily well. But, having proved ourselves in the election, we also then showed that survey research in a visual medium could do a lot of different things. So the other thing that happened in that election was there was what was known as the famous butterfly ballot in Palm Beach County. The thing about it was there was an argument that the way the ballot was designed, people would select the wrong person. This was in days before digital voting, where you would actually push actually Chads through a hole, hence the famous hanging Chad episodes. So what we were able to do was actually throw the actual ballot up, and we had people vote using a mouse on the ballot, and we then asked them who do they think they voted for. And we found substantial error. We found that there was about 10% error in who people thought they were voting for on the ballot and who they actually voted for, and it wasn't random error. It almost certainly favored the Republican, George W. Bush, in that case, and that would have actually turned the whole election. And so we were able to go out with that. It was fun. I was supposedly going up to Rochester from Washington, D.C. for 4 days to do the election. And a month and a half later, I finally got back home to D.C., where I was living at the time. So we showed that you could do things better, and not just from a sample perspective, but taking advantage of the visual medium. And I think that's important. I think a lot of folks have forgotten that the thing about survey research, there was a mantra at that time for online survey research: faster, cheaper, better. And there really were things that were better. Not everything was better. If you didn't do anything to the sample, it was still biased. But the visual medium that you had, you were able to get to more folks. You were able to engage them. We found that if you showed brand logos and without the name of the brand on there, it actually had a better connection to some of the outcomes that branding tracking studies look at with aided and unaided awareness. It was a much better predictor of those things. I don't think most folks are not using the visual medium even today to take advantage of those things that we found way back when. So large panels, small throughput, but the throughput grew. And it grew fast enough that suddenly, panels weren't, which had some good characteristics. You knew who was in there. You'd correct a lot of the biases. But we soon got enough throughput that we started to reach our maximums. And we had to lower the standards from 30 days to 15 days, once a week. And it just kept going down. But then we started getting new sources. So river samples became a big thing. And there was an argument to be made that river samples would be like panels, but better, because there really was some element of random selection in the river sample. Now, the irony is, having had the benefit of verification and knowing who's in the river sample, these were people who were going to be a part of a panel were also much more likely to take the river sample. So you weren't really expanding the sample supply as much as you thought you were. But it did allow us to do more, and we kept going forward. Well, we started getting some real quality issues. There were professional respondents, particularly as we lowered the number of the increments between surveys that we would allow. Eventually, we took that away, and just you could take as many surveys as you want. Well, this led to the rise of professional respondents. People who understood, we understood, because we had done a lot of this work, that incentives were important, particularly for the longevity of a panelist, to get them to take surveys. Well, there's also perverse incentives that come into play, which is people want the money. One of the things that happened in the late 2000s, when we were already in our first quality crisis, was we did a panel of panelists. I was the moderator for it, but we surveyed a lot of people who were parts of panels. And then we were at a conference in Las Vegas, the Casro Research Conference, online research conference. And so we invited those in the area who we had asked, who had been part of the survey. We invited 5 or 6 of them to come on stage, and we actually had a great panel at the conference. It was so good that a month later, one of our great clients called me up and said, "Hey, I need to tell you about something." I was like, "Oh crap, what's that? That seems rather ominous." And they said, I was at the Casro Research Conference and I saw this amazing thing, the panel of panelists. And here I am, we have this great relationship. I think that, he's congratulating me for putting on a really good show. And it becomes more and more obvious that he's telling me about this panel, forgetting that I'm the one who's moderating this panel. But there were several big things that came out of it. And, the first one was, there was a gentleman, when we went into incentives and, what do you do with the incentives, and et cetera, et cetera. He was paying his rent. Now, first of all, Las Vegas, particularly at that time, was very, very cheap. It's my hometown now, and, it's not as cheap anymore. But the other thing was, initially people thought this was because he was getting all this money from surveys. Qualitative work is where he got most of his money. He was earning $300 to $400 a month in combination between online surveys and qual, and I would say 90% of that was from qualitative. But that was the first gasp that went through the audience. And then, this is one of my favorite moments of all time from a conference. Basically, this lovely woman, she looked like everyone's grandmother. I got to meet and get to know these folks a little bit, and she was just wonderful. And the question put in front of the panel was, do you ever take surveys that you've taken before? And so she raised her hand and said yes. There was a gasp through the audience, and it was such that I thought they were going to get up and do real harm to this woman, because how dare you? You're impugning the integrity. You're causing these horrible things to happen to our surveys. We've got these completes, and even though you're on multiple panels, you should self-select out. Things of that nature, and they really were starting to get really up in arms, and I thought I was going to have to end it just because of that. But she was perfect. She looked at them and said, well, here's the thing. I start taking surveys earnestly, and I want to complete them to help you guys out. But all your surveys look the same. So basically, I'm at the end of a survey before I realize I've taken it again. So at that point, I'm not going to quit. I'm just going to keep going forward. And I thought this was a brilliant move because we are concerned about quality. And too often, quality is put on the respondent. But here it was, the sameness, the way that we wrote surveys were not unique. And so she pointed out that the responsibility was on those who had designed the survey itself. She wasn't trying to do something to harm our industry or to do anything of that nature. She was trying to answer the survey as truthfully as possible, but everything looked the same. It was our fault. We didn't differentiate. We didn't, do the right things. And I do believe that's one of the things missing from the discussion in the latest data quality initiative. And I'm actually about to put it back onto the discussion board at SampleCon. But this was part of a lot of the great work. But there were quality issues. So I have to credit Procter and Gamble. They had they still do. They have a wonderful research department, and they were getting concerned about quality. It's not that they weren't able to use the data, but they saw more and more data quality issues cropping into it. And in fact, they started thinking about, are we going to have to go back to the ways we used to do research? And they were great partners with the ARF, the Advertising Research Foundation. And so we started this industry-wide initiative, which at the time was just known as Foundations of Quality, but has become known as Foundations of Quality 1, because, of course, there was a Foundations of Quality 2 that actually happened. So we got people from the industry together. We talked about the quality issues. We actually started working together across companies, which was particularly in Foundations of Quality 2, it was a little bit more important. Now, I will say, both FOQ1 and FOQ2 took forever to actually get anything done. Everybody had day jobs. And then the other thing is, they were people like me at the time. I eventually grew into a senior executive at the true leadership level. I wasn't at the time. And so we were just doing fantastic work, but it wasn't necessarily getting knocked up the chain. And I think that's one of the problems that we suffered from, as to why more of the great work we did wasn't actually put out into the industry. So we worked together, lots of great friends from the time, but I have to say it, we're sort of back where we started. Now, as part of the quality issue, we started getting the rise of the first set of quality solutions that I think. So there was TrueSample through its various incarnations. Mark Menning did a wonderful job with that. It wasn't adopted as much as it should be, and there were some issues, but it was actually a really good effort to verify respondents, to make sure that across, as we needed more and more sample to complete each project, you would have to go across companies and blend sample. So we went from the time being where you would get all of your sample from one panel. You knew those biases. You knew what was going on. Then we started moving into blending of samples across panels, and I'm going to jump forward a little bit. And then at the end, right when we were doing Foundations of Quality 2, everyone knew that there was the problem that if you don't qualify for a survey in the olden days, you were just done. And, respondents were getting mad at that. And by the way, we actually had pretty good response rates at the time. So back in the 2000s, we'd get 60, 70% response rates. I would venture from a panel these days, response rates just to the initial invite are down at the 2 to 3% level, and I might be a bit generous for that. But then we became too successful as an industry, so we needed to bring in more sample. So we start blending panels together. So we knew this panel and that panel, and we can control the amount that we got from each, so there was a consistency at least. Well, panels started running out of sample, so in the background, they had to go out and get sample from other panels. So you might have thought you were contracting from 2 panels, but you were really contracting from 4 panels, and you may have never known this. We went through a stage where we were adamant that transparency was important, and you had to start telling folks. In the everything old is new again, I think we've walked away from that. One of the things that I'll be doing is looking into what's the right balance. There is a negative for a supply company having to say who all their supply is coming from, because it'll be known to the other supply companies. But there's got to be a middle ground in some form or fashion, and we're searching for that. Okay, so true sample, digital fingerprinting, CAPTCHA, but there were also lots of in-survey techniques, most of which still survive today. And I've had lots of conversations about this with folks. My preferred methodology in survey is looking at time to completion. That can be very difficult, though. You have to do the right thing when you have to use medians and judge how much lower or even above the median you are. But the problem is you have to take into account what route you took through the survey, because not everyone takes the same route. Some people get more questions, some people get less questions. So it gets very complicated, and I know people have moved away from it. I do think that if you can figure it out, and there are ways of figuring it out, particularly in this day and age with computational efficiency and things of that nature, it's the best methodology only because it gets to incentives. People who aren't trying to take your survey seriously, they want to get through the survey as fast as possible. Now, that doesn't mean their time to completion is as fast as possible. Folks are smart and they learn, and they may in fact leave the browser open. So that being said, the people who aren't great, particularly when you compare to other metrics, are usually those at either ends. It's a bimodal distribution, and those at either ends of the distribution. The other thing that people put forward, and a lot of people are really hot about, and this came up at this time, were the red herring type questions. The questions where you asked a question and you said, ignore the real answer to this, select option B. Or, the question itself was going along that route. It was supposed to, if I'm going through and I'm just randomly putting an answer down, I'm going to get to those folks. Well, all the research we did, and remember we did a lot of research in those days, showed that all we were doing was dinging the good respondents who didn't really understand that we wanted them to go away from giving us their real answer. The bad respondents, they knew about this, and they would adjust, and they got through it more often than not. So I'm not a real fan of that. I think that there are other things. The other thing that personally I'm not a fan of, which I may end up getting hate mail, is people analyze the open-end text responses. And particularly in surveys that have a lot of them, Look, I'm in the industry. I know how valuable this is, but after otherwise answering the everything accurately, I won't give the best answers to open-end text, particularly if it's a long survey, if it if it's repetitive, if you keep asking text box after everything. So for that reason, I think it should be part of a whole in judging the quality of the survey, but not the only thing. So we were doing all these things back then. I think we've gotten better. I think that we have solved some of the issues. We have good solutions in place. But the one thing that we have to admit to ourselves is that as soon as we solve one quality issue, somebody, particularly people engaged in fraud, will figure out another way. Okay, so we have professional respondents, we have quality issues. There we are, we're back again. Again, I'm probably not going to be able to edit that out, but we'll see what ends up happening. So we're now becoming more sophisticated, particularly on the technology side. So as I said, we had routers that came up in FOQ 2. We came up with sort of the best practices for routers. At the time, most of these were closed systems. So if I have a panel, I'm going to run the router around the panel, and it's a closed system. It's still my panel. I know it. But then we started having to add sample to it, and the routers became more open systems. And those became much more difficult to control. You didn't know the composition. If you started bouncing across routers in the industry, which then ended up happening, you didn't know the intermediate outcomes in many cases. And that's what's causing a lot of the issues we have now, the non-transparency. So we actually considered what the issues would be at the time, and we had working solutions for all those things. But as there has been a commoditization of the sample, putting these solutions into place costs money, and therefore you want to get paid more money for it. It's vitally important. So, we're at where we're at right now, partially because the solutions to some of these issues cost money. So there we have the blending of sources, the rise of platforms and aggregators. We're getting further and further away from where we started. And I've heard some really smart people say, I think we're going to go back to just smaller panels that handle a subset of the business. And my heart sort of wants to go there. I don't think realistically from a business perspective, we're going to be able to get there. I think that there's too much business in the survey sample world, the supply world. We haven't completely crashed when it comes to quality. And as such, I don't think people are going to step back. I think there are some companies out there that are actually arguing about the purity of the panel, doing the right things. And as I've said in a previous talk, I actually wanted to, back in 2001, talk about the rise of knowledge networks. A probability-based, I hate the phrasing, panel. That does, still to this day, it's bounced around a little bit, company to company, but still this day does wonderful research. But the panel is small, and it costs a lot of money. So it's high quality, and the question is, how much better is the quality? Is it worth the money? Certainly those who are over at Ipsos who now have the knowledge panel would say, of course it is. Not everybody would. And even if everybody wanted it, the samples aren't big enough. You start adding in Amerispeak, and there are some others who are trying to do the same sort of thing, and you get some really great efforts. But I will say, knowledge networks, I know this from talking with the founders, at one point was created because of some of the work that, as a response to some of the work that we were doing at Harris. One of the founders, Norman Nye, may rest in peace, was a classmate of Gordon Black, and they've been competitive all their lives, and both highly successful in business. and they saw what we were doing. We were claiming quality research. They thought they could do it better, and they created knowledge networks. And so competition does wonders for for what's going on. But I don't know if we're going to go back wholesale into the world of panels. Do I think I would solve some of our issues? I do. Do I think we could generate panels big enough as a standalone to truly handle the work that's being asked of them? No, I don't. And I think that's kind of why I don't believe wholesale we're going to go in that direction. But we'll see. I've been wrong before. I can be wrong again. And one of the things I've told folks is that you can always convince me. I'm a unique person. You have to make a very strong argument, but I will change opinions on some of these things. So other trends that came up through the late 2000s, early 2010s. And remember, at this time, I was co-chairing the CASRO Research Conference year after year. So I saw what people wanted to talk about. And my favorite one is every year, like 2008 was the first year. People had mobile phones, and we were going to be doing a lot more survey work on mobile devices. So 2008 was the year of mobile. Well, guess what? 2009 was also the year of mobile. 2010 was the year of mobile. 2011, I think we went through 8 or 9 years where it was the year of mobile. And I find that this happens a lot in the world of survey research is we see new trends emerging and we think it's going to take over immediately. And partially is because that is what happened once online took off immediately. So some work of folks, if people are taking surveys on mobile devices, the visual medium that they're working with is different, and that impacts the responses. So there had to be a wholesale change in design. The amount of time people are willing to put in on mobile devices is less than they were on a computer where they were sitting down and taking the survey. So it required a wholesale change in the way we thought. Now, I would actually argue we haven't made completely the wholesale change, but we made a good enough effort that finally after several years and certain companies being really adamant about adhering to a set of principles and a set of rules, when it came to surveys, we finally did have the year of mobile, but it was almost 10 years after the first year of mobile. The other thing that's been hanging around forever has some good results and some good, some things to I've totally lost my train of thought, to recommend it is the neuroscience world. At every conference that I was, we would get proposals for, there would always be 2 or 3 neuroscience applications. So I think there's a use there. I still think it's very niche in our world. Same things with like receipt tracking, eye tracking. Receipt tracking has become a bigger and bigger part of the ecosystem. It is survey-like in a sense, but it's got some advantages. It's not, some of the biases that we see. You get the actual data itself, and that's wonderful. But the next step is making sure it can be linked to surveys, which some great companies are actually doing. There are still some of the quality issues that we actually have with regard to survey research applies on receipt tracking as well. And then there was quick surveys. These were the those vendors. I was part of one company, Taluna, that pioneered quick surveys, but these were just really fast turnaround surveys that you yourself programmed. You would write the questions, you would ask for the sample if it was sample based, or you'd send it out to, if it was just your client base and you just want to send it out to your contacts, you could do that. So quick surveys led to the whole principle of the democratization of research. And I was part of that. I will tell you, I'm not sure that was great for the industry. I think there are a lot of things to recommend it, and I think we have stepped back from full self-service into, we're going to help you do something. You're going to do mostly on your own, but there's always the help there. The good parts of the democratization of research is that it brought it to more and more folks. Places that wouldn't have done research in the past were now doing research. The bad aspects of it is not everybody knows how to do research. It is a complicated things. There are real skills to doing so. And without the understanding of those skills, you got a lot of bad stuff going on. And people weren't aware that they were actually putting out bad stuff. So part of that I do think contributes to the data quality issues that we're having today, which I put as fraud, suboptimal behavior, a combination of fraud, suboptimal behavior, and just bad surveys, bad survey design, bad sampling plans, not understanding population of interest. That's the third bucket that I think lives out there. So lots of stuff happening. And now we're getting into, what's everyone talking about in the industry? Well, everyone's talking about AI, of course, and also data quality. I think data quality is something that comes back. I have a different perspective on this. One, AI is a concept. There's a lot of different techniques and methodologies underneath it. But at the end of the day, it's a way of generating information. Data quality is a way of ensuring that the information that you're generating is accurate and is useful in terms of answering questions, providing insights, doing what you need it to do. And so AI and the data quality initiatives will only be successful if we answer questions and provide insights either better, faster, or cheaper. And let me take those very quickly. Better, I think people would argue that AI is just going to inherently be better at a multitude of different things. I think that's right. I'm not saying that's wrong, but I go back to sort of the trend of neuroscience. Neuroscience was looking at things that, honestly, surveys were doing a good job of answering. And so the question is, will the better things that it does, will it actually do it so much better that it matters? And then there's the other aspect of AI, which is, strangely enough, people trust AI. It's a computer that's generating this thing. It doesn't always give you better information, and it will start to lose its potency if several bad decisions are made because people relate on AI. So I think there is some baby steps and guardrails that need to be put in place. Will we do things faster? Almost certainly. I think this is actually where AI really shines, and the applications of AI that have worked well, I think, it's about efficiency and doing the same thing a human could do per se, faster. Now, I still think there are guardrails. I do think that there needs to be some check that is not AI to guarantee that we've done it correctly. But this is where I think AI shines. And then cheaper. Cheaper gets us into trouble a lot. I think in the long run, AI will be cheaper. It'll be more efficient, and therefore will be cheaper. I think the development of applications, there will be a larger fixed cost, but then the variable cost will actually come down. From data quality's perspective, I think the industry dies if ultimately data quality degrades significantly from where we're at. And that's a big, big statement. I don't think we get there, let me be very clear. And I think people are taking it seriously, and we're taking it seriously at the highest levels, which to me is critical. But we also have to be very clear to the end users of research why it's important for them to be involved and things of that nature. So I think the topics we're talking about are probably right, but I think the dimensionality in which we're talking about them may need a bit of tweaking as we move forward. So that takes us from the late 1990s all the way through today. It's an industry that went from being a pariah to actually being the savior for many companies. It allowed companies who, when all research was done by phone or face-to-face or mail, just couldn't afford it. They now can afford good research. It has allowed data to lead at companies, and it's allowed better decisions to be made. So I think over time we've done just a great job. I do see cycles in what we're doing. I do see us trying to address some of the same issues. I think that the spirit we had at the beginning needs to come back into play. I think we need to do more experimentation. And part of that may lead to rising prices. But you also get what you pay for. So at the end of the day, I hope you guys have enjoyed this walk down memory lane, the history of online survey research, which is a full one. We've done a lot. We really have over this past 25, 30 years. But I think the next decade is going to be filled with a lot of innovation. I do think we need to get back to being more visual in nature. There was a period where that exploded, and then we've come back to just asking questions. The visual nature of the medium that we're in, I think, is key for where we're at. I think we need to rethink incentives. It's strange. We had a lot of incentive research, and as I said, I think there are good folks in the incentive world, and there's more research being done. But we go back to first principles. Why do we incentivize people? Well, we incentivize people because we want them to be part of the research ecosystem. We want them to give us good answers. We want them to do a variety of things. But we also want to make sure there are safeguards in place that those who want to take advantage of the incentive systems aren't allowed to. So I just think there's got to be more research that comes into the ecosystem so that we can get back to just flying high, being effective, and going forward. Anyways, thank you guys for listening. Next week, we're going to talk about the state of the industry. The week after that, we're finally going to get into everyone's favorite topic, AI. And the week after that, we start having guests. Aren't you excited? I'm excited. Anyways, thank you for listening, and I will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.